is a little after 5:30. We'll call this meeting to order. Karen, could we get a roll call, please?
Blake Roberts.
Here.
Judy Hontash.
Here.
Sam Mesnick.
Here.
Mark Finneman.
Here.
Jennifer Lorge. Here. Joshua Archer. Mara Bain.
Here. I'd ask all those that are able to please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Members of the EDA, before you have an agenda for this evening, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Oppose? Motion carries. First item on the agenda, or item number 5, is the approval of our June 24th meeting minutes, which was our last meeting, as we did not hold our previously scheduled meeting for lack of a quorum. And thank you to those who were able to reach out in advance to give us a heads up to that quorum challenge. With that, I will entertain a motion to approve the June 24th meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
It's a motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Oppose? Abstain? Motion carries. A follow-on item to some work that we have been doing on the EDA is related to downtown sewer infrastructure CDA grant application and resolution. Dan, do you want to, are you walking us through this
I
this
can do
evening?
that. President, members of the EDA, if you recall, we did a couple of scoping meetings. We talked about the scoping of a downtown study. First of all, we kind of went through and take a look at what's the downtown area that we want to study. And then we started looking at, what are the options for what we can kind of gain from going in and doing a study of that area. One of the things that came out of that kind of deeper dive was we need a better understanding of what the current capacity is with our infrastructure, especially our sewer side. As the downtown starts to face redevelopment pressures, we need to make sure that we know what the capacity is of the current system. And then at what point would we be required to do an additional build out? Part of it right now, we kind of have a general idea of where it is, but we need to know, like, as these bigger projects, say 2 parcels combined, come in as another multifamily unit, that could dramatically increase the amount of flow that we're seeing through our sewer systems. We need to make sure that that's has the capacity to handle that increase in usage. Additionally, we're also looking at it from, once we get those base numbers, we can start to model. We can start looking at, what is, X number of units of, housing down there do, what does a commercial do, what does this type of use do? So we can start to develop more of a plan that's actually realistic based on the current infrastructure that's there. So we're kind of making some of those projections based on actual data, not necessarily more kind of pie in the sky. Just kind of, this might be a good fit. We'll know if this goes in there, yes, we have capacity for it. If this goes in, we'll have to do a major upgrade to the sewer system to accommodate it. As part of that, I reached out to Ryan at Bolton and Mink and asked him to kind of design a sewer system study. What came back was actually a 2-year study, so this is actually will be split out over 2 years. The first year will be the data collection year. We'll actually put flow meters into the sewer system at specific locations in the downtown to actually measure what the current flow rates are. Once all that data is collected, they'll then go back in the year 2, which will be next year, they'll do the analysis and the modeling. So this year, what's the grant application is before you tonight is for the data collection, and then next year another grant application will come forward again, and that'll be for the modeling. So this is a 2-year window, and then at the beginning of next year, probably sometime early, probably second quarter next year, we should have those results back. Does that seem? Not to put you in a spot, Ryan, but like early next year on the models, or?
Yeah, the longest portion of the project is basically trying to gather field information 4 to 5 months in the time frame, because then we'll get the wet season and the dry season. So you'll be able to see where I&I plays into that too and stuff like that.
So then when we get
next year, you could have it completed, yeah.
Yeah, so once we get all that data back, then we'll have a really good idea of what we have available, what we can, what we can reasonably put through, a redevelopment stage without having to do any major projects downtown. So what you have before you is a grant application to Washington County. I have talked to Chris about splitting this application up over multiple years, and he said there's no issue with that. So I split out year one. We're asking the Washington County CDA for $8,000 to help fund the data collection portion. The EDA would be contributing $2,500. Based on that, that's the EDA's match on this grant application. Total cost for the data collection is $10,500. There's two phases. There's two required motions tonight. One would be the approval of making the application to Washington County, and then there's also a resolution, which is Resolution 722-1901, which again kind of approves that application, just a little more formal process. So we'd want a motion to authorize the application and then the resolution, which would again is a requirement of the grant application from Washington County. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have on the process, on the project itself.
Just a clarification from Chris, probably. It's a continuum project, so next year, we finish the next two phases of that project. And I'm just kind of hanging on to an idea, if anything went over 10,000, it'd be a different proportion of cost. Are we gonna break that down into two grants next year then? And in those two grants, is there any concern about being approved for two grants fairly close to one another in the early part of next year?
President Bain, members, I think I hadn't really thought about that, but you bring up a good point. Assuming that it's the same project, but there's two different activities maybe, we might look at it differently, but this one perhaps could trigger that $10,000, which is a larger pool of funding for next year. So we'll have to talk a little bit about that. I hadn't really thought about that until you asked. So,
How did the proportions change when we got past that larger pool?
so by policy, the program has two funding pools. The smaller pool is grants of less than $10,000, and for every dollar we put in, we ask you to match it with 20 cents. So 20%. Anything over $10,000, we ask for a one-to-one match. And so this could potentially trigger that, and I hadn't thought about that, but we should probably explore that a little bit more in detail.
Well, you're the one that kind of knows how many people are coming at you for this wonderful relationship offer that the county offers. It's a great relationship and a great percentage if we can hold these price tags at certain places. So I guess you'd have to tell us whether there's a lot coming at you and there's going to be a challenge to get certain things approved.
From an availability of funding, we have money available. We had not used our full allocation yet for this year, and we are planning on budgeting another $150,000 for next year. So we do have resources available, but we can work through the logistics and talk about that a little bit amongst the staff here.
Is it fair to ask how much of the pool this year has been consumed?
So for this year, we have $150,000 that has not been accessed yet, and for next year, we're planning on asking the county board on August 14th. I think the next county board workshop is to talk about our levy. We're asking for another $150,000, so the total combined for $300,000 for the whole county would be available if the county board approves it.
I imagine as the year goes on, toward the end of the year, the rush to come at you would be there more likely.
Yeah, honestly, I do believe that we've got a couple of projects in the works, so to speak. I have not seen the applications yet, but I have talked to Woodbury, perhaps Oakdale. Oak Park Heights might be coming in with an application, but I think those are the three that I'm anticipating between now and the end of the year.
Thanks.
Any further questions? And Dan, just process clarification, the resolution, you don't need two separate actions tonight. The resolution is intended to cover the grant application, all that's needed, correct?
Correct, yeah, that was my apology. You are correct, it's the resolution.
Happy to entertain any further questions. If not, members of the EDA, page 9 of your packet has resolution 722-1901.
I would recommend approval.
So motion to approve the resolution. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Motion and a second. Any discussion on this item? Hearing none. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose, abstain, motion carries. Our next item, virtual data center scoping project. Dan, is this you as well?
Yep, I have an update for you on the virtual data center scoping project. If you recall, part of this was based on what the headwaters, 123 acres, kind of taking that parcel to the next step and actually taking a look at what would it actually take from a process perspective, from a design perspective, to actually put a data center or a technology company onto that site. Like, what would they need infrastructure-wise, permit-wise, kind of the full gamut of requirements for that. Two reasons for that. One, speed to market is key in these situations. When a project comes forward, the quicker that you can get them in the ground, the more assurances you can give a project that you start in December and you have all your approvals in by, say, the following December for next year's construction season. Helps you rank higher, because a lot of times when these projects start to go on the ground, they'll start selling data space, right, their server space right away. So they want that quicker turnaround time as possible. By doing a scoping project, you start to know where those timelines are. So what we did is we went out, met with a vendor who does site selection for technology companies, and asked them to give us a proposal on kind of what it would entail, what would the deliverables be, what would they be studying. So after meeting with them, they gave us a proposal for a conceptual hyperscale data center assessment project, which is a tongue twister I found out today after reviewing it. Some of the things that they start to look at as part of that assessment is what is the site size? So what size site would a data center require? So right now we have 123 acres that's down there. By going through the assessment, they may realize that the most of them, what they see, are going to be based on 20 acres or 10 acres. So we'll get a better idea as to, do we have enough land there, too much? Would they potentially carve it off into smaller lots? They also would present a conceptual design. So you actually would take a look at a project they had, a potential project they'd done somewhere else, and say, here's what these projects look like. And then they would do a conceptual design on the site. So you would get some modeling, you'd get a 3D rendering of what the site would look like on the actual location. One of the benefits of a conceptual design is that if you're talking to a selector and you actually can show them an image of a site on there, you get them more excited than just numbers on paper. It's kind of that visual marketing aspect that's there. They also look at site accessibility from both how can you get access to all the equipment in there, where they need to be storing some of their cooling towers, where they be able to do some outside storage, what's the power availability, what's the fiber availability, is there enough redundancy baked into the system. So you kind of get that full site accessibility review and process done as part of this. Some of the key concerns, like from a timeline approval perspective, honestly, I think some of the local approvals would probably be easier to obtain than once you get to the state. Watershed could put slow down the process as they go through their process. If there's a utility extension that's required, there has to go through a review panel there. So we would at least kind of know city approvals are 3 months start to finish, utilities are 6 months, and Watershed will run tandem. So we'll kind of have a better idea of what are those timelines throughout the whole process. Also look at if there's any gaps in like our building code. If there's a specific requirement for, say, mezzanine height, that we want to make sure that it's in line with what these projects have. And if there is a gap there, are we able to address it, or just it's not that it would ever kill a project if they'd have to lower mezzanine, but we can let them know, hey, our mezzanine height is going to be 15 feet, and they may want 20 because that's what they have in Iowa, so to speak. So they may have to make some early changes. It just helps to identify that on the forefront of the project. And then kind of overall, also identify just some of the risks of putting a project there. Are there any environmental risks? Are there any transportation risks? Kind of just a risk analysis, because a lot of times when these data centers get placed or a technology company gets placed, they kind of want to know, are you on a fault line? Is there, high probability of, earthquakes, or, are you next to a major, road that has high probability of a truck getting off the road and going in? They concerned about security too. They want to make sure that they're able to secure their project and, fence it, make sure that it has that access for security. Some of the deliverables that this project would deliver, we would end up with a site-specific checklist, which basically then would go through all of our project timelines, all of the deliverables, what we would need. So when a project comes forward, we can kind of say, we've ran a virtual one through, here's what putting a data center in Forest Lake would look like, kind of soup to nuts, kind of here's your analysis of that. We'd also have a pretty good understanding of the interaction between the various agencies, and it would also give staff takeaways to say if we start to see a snag point or a choke point between say, the city and utilities commission. We can start to work to see how can we kind of expedite that process so we can kind of get those lines of communication opened up. So when the project does come forward, we're not starting from scratch. We're kind of starting in an advantaged position. A big one would be the model of what the site would look like when developed. I think that would be a key takeaway. So we kind of really would know, what does this site look like? What's the potential for it? What does, if a resident comes in and says, what's the data center going to look like on there? We'd be able to say, here's the interaction and kind of what the market's currently building on the site. We would have an extremely deep understanding, and we all would probably be experts in terms of what it would take to actually site a data center in Forest Lake. And from a planning perspective, it'd get us shovel ready. I mean, that's kind of what we have. This isn't necessarily shovel ready from like a utility standpoint or a site prep standpoint, but from a planning perspective, we'd be as shovel ready as probably any municipality, in the state of Minnesota. So we got a pretty deep proposal from the engineering firm that does do a lot of work with data centers. We're still currently working out, trying to get project or kind of get cost participation from other project partners, since this actually kind of came out of the Minnesota Technology Corridor. We're trying to see what other contributions that we can get towards that, so it's not just full cost borne by the city of Forest Lake. Don't have those numbers kind of assembled at this point. They're still making calls. We're still making calls to kind of see what we're going to end up with from a funding perspective. But one thing that also came up kind of after that initial study, we kind of went through and kind of got like I'd call it like the advanced degree in data centers. Chris actually had forwarded something that Great River Energy does. They kind of do more like the beginner, kind of step your feet into the water for data center scoping. So what Great River Energy did is a couple of years ago, they actually met with Deloitte. It's a consulting firm that does, I think it's real estate consulting. And they actually had Deloitte staff train staff from Great River Energy on kind of pre-flighting or doing some pre-checking work on sites within the state that could be done kind of as a, kind of a scoping light, so to speak. One thing with this, they actually deliver a report that I would say from its face, I'll put it on your screens in front of you. It looks probably more like an executive summary that you would see on the document. It just kind of goes through, and it doesn't necessarily say, it'll say zoning and proximate uses, they're favorable for the specific site that's here. It doesn't go through the detail of this is the current zoning, this is what the requirements are. But it does give you enough to keep a conversation going with the site selector. So this is a site that they have out in Benton County. They kind of go through, it's a green, yellow, red. All of these sites here, line up favorably. They also go through just a very high level power analysis that's here, and they kind of show the site location and where the substation is. And then second page, they kind of go a little bit deeper. They just kind of have kind of that initial checklist. One benefit to kind of starting out with the Great River Energy approach is there's no cost to get this work done. And secondly, we also would ask them to kind of help train city staff to become kind of a bit more in depth with what's going on here. So let's just say down the road that the Headwaters site does not pan out, it doesn't work as a data center. By having the knowledge base within the city, we can start to look at other sites within the city and say, well, this one might, but this one didn't work out. But we have a site that's surrounded by wetlands with just enough high ground in it to make that 6 acres work, and fiber's close enough. So we can start to look for maybe some of those sites that aren't necessarily coming front of mind, but when you're kind of trained into what to look for, what the selectors are looking for, we may start to see some more of those unique sites. Other kind of benefit about having, kind of the Great River Energy, run it through their first initial process is a lot of what they do would transfer right into the more in-depth project as well. When I kind of looked through the scope of what the Parallel Technologies was offering, a couple of the first things they did was kind of looking at the site from a go, no-go perspective, which is kind of what this is. So in essence, we're kind of doing that outside of paying the consultant to do it. We're able to get this work done. So kind of after looking at this from the two different proposals, one, I'd recommend kind of going through this kind of initial Great River Energy model, just kind of getting that pre-flighting done to say, hey, we've already kind of got the phase 1 done, we've got the wetland delineation done, let's take a look at laying out what's the fiber optic, the electrical power, just that initial pre-flighting. If the site kind of goes through there and Great River Energy says, yeah, this looks like a great site, then we go to the Palo Technologies and we kind of go in their advantage to the fact that we have more information to kind of hand them off on day one, which hopefully potentially can reduce the cost of doing that more in-depth study. Other plus side with this is that we'd be able to, in the meantime, while that larger study is being done, we'd have a marketing piece that we could take to selectors and say, here's kind of all of the pre-flighting that was done. It's not one of those things where it's not just done at a staff level. There actually is, since they partnered with Deloitte, they have kind of that industry credibility attached to it because Deloitte trained them, they kind of train us. So we're kind of saying that we're just not going out of this because we think you need power at some level. We can actually say, based on recommendations from Deloitte, this is what's needed in here. So kind of what's being recommended at this point would be a two-pronged approach where we reach out to, staff reaches out to Great River Energy, kind of starts this kind of initial pre-flighting one, does a little bit of that training to kind of learn what sites in general look like, and then kind of continue on the fundraising standpoint with other partner agencies within the technology corridor on the more in-depth one. I mean, ideally, we'd want both to be completed, but I think starting here is a really good starting point, so that way we're not going to be duplicating work in the more in-depth Parallel Technologies one, which that's the one that's going to give us the 300-page report, which is going to be fantastic for when a selector comes in. We'll be able to answer any question they have. The Great River Energy one will keep a selector on the phone. It'll kind of, if they call in, say one calls in 3 months, we can keep them on the phone, keep the projects going, as we develop that next level of detail. So that's kind of where we are currently with the scoping project at this point. So I know there was some requests for an update and just kind of looking for feedback, any kind of specific questions on the process, any of the different studies, deliverables, happy to answer them.
Questions for Dan? Mark?
I like building through this first step. It makes all the sense in the world to clarify for your next step in terms of fee structure and everything else. My question's sort of about that next phase. So this is the satellite view of it all, and then we step into it a lot more detail with the consultant at whatever that rate of cost is for whatever they're going to produce. When they get down to the site specific and come from the point of view of the data center being the priority on the site, will we be able to bounce off them with city engineers or otherwise to at least account for what's going to happen on the balance of the site so there's not a disadvantage that's generated? Because they can be positioned in a variety of places on that site, but there might be a challenge as to what's the primary position for other businesses as well. So my hope is that if they bring their expertise forward, they know it tags along with their data center. And if they could expand it to really say, here's what usually accompanies a data center, and here's where they're usually positioned, and here's what we have left over for other purposes. I just want to account for the other purposes on site at the same time they're planting their particular priority.
And I think in the conversations that we had with the group that was something that was, when they looked at site size, it was one of the first things they looked at, where if they say it's a 10-acre site, I mean, obviously, if they're, 123 acres, if you take 10 acres out, you have 113 acres left that you're right, they can have some other uses associated with it. So I think that all would looked at as a full package. Like it wouldn't just be, put it in the middle and that's it, then kind of, not let any other uses happen. We want to make sure that as that goes through that more, detailed site-specific site, we could say, here's 10 acres, they need 10 acres for the actual site, they want 5 acres around it, then we can start to say, how does that play into the whole site? Where is the best position to allow for other development to happen within the site from both, land use and also from utilities perspective as well. We don't want to make sure that if the infrastructure is going in there, they do require a lot of water, that we have enough capacity in that system to allow for additional commercial, or if residential is found to be a good mix, that, that residential usage as well.
And that's all my press is just as long as we're looking at the total site at that particular point of time, so just one priority is not acknowledged and the rest forgotten.
And I think, and that's part of what we, they talked about too. They kind of said, when you look at these things, they had different land use requirements. Some are on small, 5-acre sites. Some are on, built in the middle of a city, and other ones are on 150 acres, 300 acres, so they can allow for future expansion. So they kind of run the gamut, but I think what Parallel Technologies offers is they offer their expertise into what they're currently seeing being built out there, so they can kind of align it with, what they're seeing. And then also, when the results of the wetland delineation come in too, then that is gonna help kind of position where that, development can happen, because we don't need to avoid the wetlands that are identified on the site as well.
And they may well see that there's 2 to 3 species of data centers that can be there at varying scales, so they might have more than just one conceptual idea of what happens there.
Correct.
And where do we stand on the other 2 assessments that have been made, wetlands and hazardous?
The phase 1 has come back in, and I'll release that back when we get the wetland. I'll bring them both back for review. But the wetland delineation, I believe the field work is completed, and it should be completed in August, correct, Ryan?
So the wetland field work and report have been completed and submitted to Rice Creek. It's just in their ball to set up the TEP meeting. So whenever they can get all the members of the TEP panel together to review the delineation, that's to be the next step.
Okay.
Other questions? I had, so a couple, have you referred to a couple times Parallel Technologies? Is that the name of the firm for
Correct.
option 1?
Yep.
What is the total cost of that study estimated? I know you're probably only in the preliminary pricing.
Right around 40 is what they came back with. So, I mean,
Okay.
it's a pretty sizable expense to go through, and that's why we're trying to look for partnerships to try to bring that price down,
For sure. And timeline for them to complete that? I'm just trying to understand again, sequencing.
Yeah, about 9 months. I mean, so it's a fairly lengthy process. I mean, it wasn't something that gets done overnight on it, but I don't, 9 months does sound correct. Wait, no, excuse me, 8 weeks. So 2 months. They have a 2-month turnaround on that.
Is the Great River effort a fairly tight timeline?
That I haven't reached out to Great River to find out what the timelines are on it. We do have a lot of that information that they have kind of assembled amongst different documents in the, from the pre-work that we did with some of the initial scoping. We do have it kind of, I'd say, peppered around different documents, and more of it just pulling it together into one, having Great River Energy review it, according to their standards, and we could get it up. So I don't anticipate that being a longer process, but I don't have it defined. It's a 2-month turnaround on that project either.
My question is, looking for advice from thoughts of certainly the EDA, maybe some thoughts from staff as well on what's our tipping point around getting too far down the path on something specific to a data center. I think there's like layers of detail, and we've looked for, anything we can do that would be site improvements from a planning perspective with very broad use. And perhaps there's some ways we could, if we were to go down the path with the Parallel Technologies, that we could broaden scope a little bit or make sure that we are creating as multi-use of a document as possible. Just a concern of mine. I think it's great we're continuing to show progress. I think it's great we're continuing to develop and invest in artifacts that would be used by investors, but just want to make sure we're not getting, kind of excluding other possibilities.
And I think that's a good point. One thing that we did discuss during the initial meeting was, they kind of said, here's a couple of options you can use for, the conceptual. We would need to pick one kind of model to use, because obviously they're modeling it off a specific project, right? So it's not like we can just say, hey, we want to have this up as a medical technology building that does remote radiology reads. We're looking at it from, is this like a Google's data center or a Facebook's data center, or is it one where it's a bunch of, like kind of the hot topic in data centers right now is investment firms will go out and buy multi-rack space, and they'll just lease out, you buy 5 racks of server space in there, and that's what so they have multiple vendors that are in one location. And I kind of recommend if they're going to do a scoping is to kind of go with the one that probably the broadest use, which would be that multi-user scenario versus like a single. Because I said, realistically, getting a Google or Facebook here is not that it can never happen. It's a larger lift than trying to find one that's more based on, if you have a private equity firm that's looking to capitalize on a, multi-use server farm, so to speak, that's probably more realistic. I think though a lot of what the end result would be in terms of what the delivery will be would transfer over to, say, a medical radiology read, because the fiber network's gonna be there, the power capacity, we could just adjust it back to what they have. So there is a little overlap, however, in talking to Parallel Technology, we would need to make a specific kind of ask for what goes there, and that's why I kind of said, pick the one that's probably the most likely to happen based on the current market, not necessarily the single user, the Google or the United Health Partners or United Health Group that comes out and puts a single-use data center in.
Great.
We're maybe, call it 6 months out to have run these two bits of gauntlet here and these 2 steps we could take. And from my hearing here at the EDA, it seems like we won't entertain anything else or consider anything else on that site until we fulfill this idea and satisfy ourselves as to whether we're going to just respond to this priority use and work that out. And then until that does happen and we react to that, we'll not consider anything else relative to land use and sale.
I don't know if that's a,
That's just how I've read the discussion from others here.
but I think part of the whole purpose in having an active marketing plan is to attract interest, and that could hit tomorrow, that could hit 2 months from now. I think we want to keep the ball moving, but I don't know if we would, I don't think we're in a position, or I haven't sensed we are in a position of excluding other land use options.
We've sort of said to a developer thus far that, hold, we gotta work this all out.
On residential, for sure, yeah.
So just residential would be the only component you're thinking of that would be.
And to be fair too, that was also just a portion of it. I mean, the initial was just 17 acres. It was never for the full piece. And, part of what we're looking at, is a full parcel development versus just start to chunk out. Because the concern would have been, hey, you sold off 17 acres on the south end and you have a use come in that needs 123 acres or 120 acres. You've now taken yourself out of the market. We did not have that answer 3 months ago, and we're getting closer to know what those sites look like, as they get, as we move forward. I mean, and you can see if you go to like Xcel Energy's kind of pre-flighted data center pre-approved sites and Great River Energies, they do run different sizes, but a lot of them are the larger parcels that they have out there. I mean, there's multiple sites that are 120 acres, located in more remote areas than where we are, but they are larger sites. So the main concern was if you start to piecemeal the parcel out, you could potentially lose a market opportunity that is there now that you have one continuous piece.
I understand that concern. I was just curious how we are processing this. If it weren't residential and if it was something fronting the parkway that knocked on the door and liked a specific siting, we could consider that, or maybe under the presumption that those sites that could be developed fronting the parkway would be there regardless for some commercial mixed-use kind of use. We're just going to say no to residential on presumably when it would grow from the south side. So that's the only thing I'm trying to get. Is that the clarity that you see?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we wouldn't turn down any opportunity. We'd have to look at it when they came in the door. But right now, residential is not excluded, but it's on the back seat. And if we had other commercial developments come in or other opportunities, we'd have to do, it would be our responsibility to do that. We wouldn't shut anybody out and would see what the best use is. So.
Okay, good.
And I think to be fair too, the 2 studies that were done, the phase 1 and the wetland delineation, are kind of more universal. They don't necessarily exclude a use, by having both of those done. And to those 2 studies' points, when I've talked to, Parallel Technologies and other selectors, they're extremely excited the fact that we already have these 2 documents, in process of being completed. They're just like they're just kind of blown away by the fact that, we're starting to assemble the right documents that we need to, make the site more appealing. So we're definitely tracking in the right direction.
Ryan, would you be able to share what the percentage, do you know yet, the wet versus buildable on that site now?
The actual percent, I don't know, but there were a lot of smaller wetlands on the site. So, could you share the report?
The wetland delineation, I haven't got the final yet.
I was just curious, maybe the acreage, if there's a number that came
Well,
up.
we sent you the report that was sent to the watershed district.
That's my apologies, that was, I do have it, yeah, I'll get a dry copy out to everybody. I was waiting for the final once it all got reviewed, and that's my apologies for that.
So there'll be a handful of diagrams in there, just make sure you read the side of what diagram refers to what, so.
And know that this is before weighing in from the
Or approval of the
watershed.
TEP panel.
Watershed district.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that, you know, I didn't inadvertently forgot that he had sent it over, but was waiting for final, once everything was final on it, so there was no
Right.
changes, just to not have any confusion as to where the report landed, but I can get a draft copy out.
Good follow-up. Your thoughts on, so it sounds like moving forward with this Great River Energy analysis is, I mean, seems like a no-brainer, and of course, option. Your thoughts on next steps with that? You mentioned some staff involvement. What do you anticipate that requiring from your time, staff time?
I mean, I think it's probably more, you know, once the conversation with Great River Energy is held, you know, kind of seeing, you know, what the process looks like for how they take their sites through these, you know, kind of, you know, checklists, you know, and if they have anything that's already, if it's just the documents that they have to go through and check it off for these 3 things, you know, that's relatively minimal. I mean, I think the benefit is once you walk one through, you know which questions to ask of electrical providers. You can call the provider up and say, you know, because right now if I have to call an electrical provider, I have no idea what I'm asking. I'm like, can you put wires in the ground to the building? I don't know what the requirements are. I don't know, what, you know, to a lesser extent too with the fiber providers as well. I don't know, you know, I mean, I know they need redundancy. I know that it gets really technical really quick. And walking through one of these, once you learn kind of the language to ask them, you know, there's benefit to that. When I look at another site saying, oh, now you're 3 miles away from the main trunk line. However, that's just extra cost to get your utilities out there, you know. So I don't anticipate, you know, a lot of staff time in there, but it is one of those things where, you know, once that education's had, once that knowledge base is, you know, within the city, you can start identifying more sites. And I think there's going to be a benefit to at least having that capacity, you know, at a staff level.
I think, so kind of feedback on next steps sounds like will you be bringing that information back to us and kind of more formal timeline,
Yep.
confirming, you know, the cost structure, recognizing that's both price as well as, I'm assuming this is a no price tag, but certainly it will be probably some staff time.
Correct. Yeah, I'll reach out to, you know, I'll get the contact from Chris or Great River Energy, have a meeting with them just to say, if it comes back and they say it's a 300-hour project, I'll let everybody know. But if they say it's, and like I said, we have a lot of this stuff. It's just in different documents. I just got to know what data they want me to pull out. You know, is a lot of the key part of this.
I just hope we can do all this without missing out on an opportunity while we're waiting for another opportunity. And that's a little bit scary of from my perspective. And so are we just looking strictly at data centers or, you know, that we want to make sure that we don't do that. That's for sure. Because if somebody else comes along ahead of time, I want to be able to act on it. You know, so.
To that point, I think it would be helpful for the EDA to see, I appreciate there's a sequence of steps, but I think it'd be helpful to see kind of a timeline of what that is so that we can manage just expectations of what could be studied, and so we aren't in a period of, or seeming to be in this 5-year study period. Just, you know, kind of, here's what we might consider next, and then recognizing that it's, you know, up to the EDA to ultimately determine timeline and scope. But seeing kind of how those things might be sequenced out would be helpful. Any other questions or items of feedback on this topic? Dan, do you have what you need? Very good. Thank you. Next item is an update on the investinforestlake.com site.
President members of the EDA, just want to kind of give us the first month's kind of usage, you know, from an analytics perspective, and then kind of where the site is and kind of what the next steps for it are. So for the first month, we had approximately 200 users access the site, which, you know, may sound relatively low. However, And talking to other kind of more regional economic development sites, they may see 300 to 400 a quarter, so we're not doing too bad just in terms of more, and again, this is all kind of launched kind of on a soft launch perspective. There never really was a hard media campaign behind it, just because there's a lot of information coming out of the city right now. I don't want to get lost in the mix. I'd rather really get it all polished up, and then kind of, this is more timeless. It can go out at any time. So we had about approximately 200 users. We had about 600 page views. The one statistic that I actually am pretty happy with is that the engagement time, so the time each user spends on the site is approximately 2 minutes. So they're not just clicking on the site and then clicking off. They're spending some time, they're actually engaging with the site. The other thing is most of what we had in those users, they're almost all new users. So there's a lot, which is again, it's probably like 95% new users coming in. So a lot of one-time users coming in, seeing it, spending some time with it. That engagement at 2 minutes for an initial site is where you kind of want to be to start out with. So we're still kind of just collecting that analytics data. I'll start to look through and develop some goals for like what we're trying to hit for user attraction, where they're starting to come through. For right now, it's just kind of it's kind of interesting. You kind of see when it first launched, there's a little bit of buzz around it. You saw the kind of the spike, and it kind of settled back down. So once we start doing any type of communications effort with it, I'll start to make sure I'll mark what the where the engagement comes in from those communications outreaches. I did add a link to the Forest Lake EDA page on the existing city's website. I know there was conversation about kind of just having that page go directly to the Invest in Forest Lake site. However, when I looked at it, there needs to be a little bit of, I got to clean up our existing EDA site just a little bit to get some of that data so I know we don't lose anything in the transition there. A couple of the next level projects that we have for it, all the handout materials that are on the site, I'll give them a refresh so they're current, up to date. I did talk to Paul at Lakes Area Television. We do have a flyover video for the airport business park parcels. We did the flyover video for the Headwaters 123. He has flown the airport business park parcels that are out there, so I will be getting a flyover video for that that'll get updated. When we get the phase 1 and the wetland delineation studies finalized, I'll get those uploaded to the site as well. And then one thing I want to develop is I'm going to be taking part in the East Metro Development Summit in August. So I'll develop some handouts that we can say, come back to, invest in Forest Lake. And actually part of the presentation during that development conference will actually focus on that website. Is kind of, if you're looking at trying to figure out why Forest Lake, I think that kind of summarizes all in one easy to take away spot. So we'll kind of just go through and kind of highlight some of that. So there'll be kind of a more formal outreach taking place here in early August at the East Metro Development Conference. So that's kind of the first month of work on it. The chat feature is working. I do have hours associated with that now. So if anybody does come in and wants, use the chat function, I'm getting emails. So the site's functioning. I got a couple of like I said, the skeleton's there. It's got to kind of build around that skeleton framework. And when you start to see like the Workforce Summit partnership video that LATV is going to be working on, that's a nice build to that workforce page. When I get the direct contact, when Washington County launches their site, I can do the link back up for the market data for the city. So we'll start to really kind of fill those portions of the site right now. They're a little bit skeleton in. And then as well, just get all that, that market study data there in one location so people can go and kind of get everything in one spot. But that's the first month, and looking forward to see what the next few months bring to the site.
Go ahead.
Were you able to capture who clicked on their email?
Not their email. It's
No identifier?
anonymized data at this point, so I don't have. I don't know, like if I go there, I don't have like the direct link that it was me that went there. Right now, I'm just getting kind of batch anonymous data. I will know where they come from a geographical standpoint. So if they're coming in from the U.S., and then I can drill down they're coming from Columbus, Ohio, for example. But I don't know, what users clicking on the site.
So of these 200 that you got, were there many out of state?
I can go through and look specifically. I just looked at the totals for the first one. Since the numbers were relatively lower, you'll start to see trends develop as you get month over month data. You'll start to see kind of that bigger base where you'll start to see, like the cities page will. The one thing you have to remember too is like you start to see a lot of sites coming in from a specific city. sometimes it's not necessarily that the resident is located there or the user is located there. That's where maybe their data, that's maybe where their access point comes out of. Like, I'll get that where if my provider at home goes out of South Dakota, it'll just pull my data center where the access point is, and it'll say you're in Brookings, South Dakota, which I'm not in Brookings, South Dakota, but, so sometimes that georeference data, you kind of got to take it with a grain of salt, but it's a good way to kind of look at, trend lines in it.
So just to clarify, in my mind, in real estate, we have something called reverse prospecting, where we can go back and pull the email. Is that a goal, or is that you're going to keep it anonymous? If they don't want to fill out anything, is there any way to track?
At this point, I don't have that tracking software in there. I believe Washington County's their site is gonna have it built in. So if we're starting to see a bunch of results coming off of their site, we can look at adding it. I don't know what the expense of it is. I just basically have the basic analytics packaging on this one at this point. I'd recommend just kind of seeing what the usage is for all of that. If we're seeing, relatively, if we see a huge spike in traffic, that we're potentially all over the nation, maybe then it's worth putting in that additional cost. But for right now, I just starting to collect the numbers to kind of help guide what those next steps are on the back end to be kind of where we're at.
At this point in time, are you like a one-person, maybe the word's not nexus, comptroller of this whole page? Whatever comes in, whatever goes out, it's you? I know your job description travels a little bit further than that, but is it an overwhelming story? Because there's all sorts of things that could be introduced. I know last time we talked, it was like, let the real estate brokers and landholders and stuff bring things forward if they wish, but that changes and it's hard to keep up with and all of that. I know some other cities that have really a strong focus on what lands are available within the city. And I'm just curious, at what point are you totally consumed and can you really keep up with this?
Right now, we do have other lands that are available through the MNCAR listing that's on there, which is pretty complete, in terms of, we got to nail down to kind of a regional nexus around Forest Lake. If you wanted to go more specific, or just only within Forest Lake, I would recommend at that point you carve off somebody who's specifically full-time on site management. You start to get into where you really get down to the weeds level, where you really want it, updated on a daily basis or weekly basis. This is designed in a way where it's more evergreen, where it stays evergreen, but you still kind of keep adding information to it, and just, you don't want to overload it with just kind of everything. You kind of want to be selective with what goes there, because what happens is you put too much on a site and you just get information overload, and none of the message points kind of get across. But at this point, it's manageable. It's completely manageable at this point.
Other questions for Dan? Very good, thank you. Second quarter EDA work plan update, which I believe members of the EDA you have in front of you in printed form. Dan, you want to walk through?
President, members of the EDA, before you have the quarter plan, or second quarter work plan update. If you recall, I did a first quarter work plan update and just kind of wanted to get these out in front of the EDA on a quarterly basis to kind of show the work that's been done, kind of pointing back to the work plan. First thing that we worked on, pre-development grant project for the city-owned, actually it's 123 acres in Headwaters, which is work plan item 4, develop a new business park. The submissions are complete. We're just waiting for the results to be posted for those. The downtown infrastructure study, which is approved tonight for execution, so that'll be executed on. So that's went from a pending to an in process, and that's where, like I said, we're gonna look at the sewer capacity. The workforce summit was actually held today, and Commissioner Lords and Commissioner Finneman, they were both in attendance, as well as President Bing was there as well. I don't know if you want to give us a quick overview of their kind of thoughts and takeaways from the workforce summit, but it was held this morning, had probably, 30, 40,
Probably 50 people.
50 people in attendance, got a nice tour of the school. So if they want to kind of add their 2 cents of what their takeaways were from the summit.
Well, I found it certainly impressive. I want to go back to school. There's lots of things I need to learn. But the idea that the public school is as vital as it is smacked me right in the face. It was always a bit of a known, but we have our specialty schools and we have the public school, and the public school covers such a wide spectrum of stuff that leads to the workforce proposition probably more than anything else does in this city. So it was impressive. And the facilities are impressive, and I'm glad the city, the public finally came around to saying it's worth the investment. I still don't think they understand what that investment accomplished, because they'd have to really go and have the same kind of profiling we had today to really know what we're getting from it all. But it's an impressive public school, the facility's impressive, and I hope we can make many more connections to the businesses. The business owners that I talked to were certainly interested in getting more fuel in terms of student participation from the Forest Lake School, because right now they seem to draw from White Bear and other places as well, but they're Forest Lake people and businesses, and they like the idea of it being Forest Lake driven.
Jen?
Well, the two big takeaways I had was this. For the students going into a business to learn the job, the business owners really need to understand it's not cheap labor they're getting. What they're doing is investing in their future and the future of the employees to find out. Yeah, it's really an incredible program. They took 3 students into, was it Team Vantage or, and one had no idea what he wanted to do. One had a pretty good idea he wanted to be in production, and another one wanted to be in, he ended up in a word I didn't even know, micro measurements of something. But they all got a taste of what they might be interested in. And so they're not in there to be cheap labor working alongside them. They're there to learn. And that is feeding the future job supply. I think that's a point they really need to understand, is they have to commit to that. The businesses need to. And the other surprising thing was they have these beautiful facilities, the labs to teach woodworking, shop, all different kinds of things, but they've lost a couple really good instructors and have not filled those positions. So here we've got the facilities now and nobody to take over and train them. So what are we going to do about that? That's a good question.
And just to wrap up the Workforce Summit, I did ask LATV to be there and film it today, so they did film the entire presentation. They're going to edit it up and put it on their cable station as well on the YouTube channel. And then after the meeting, talked to Paul briefly, and we're actually going to be kind of taking that footage and condensing it down, adding some interviews with, I think the initial would be a couple of the people from the high school who are kind of in charge of the program, and then potentially reaching out to Team Vantage to see if they kind of want to talk about their success story on that. And taking that whole 3 to 5 minute video, we'll put that on the EDA's Invest in Forest Lake site. So when people are looking for what are you doing for workforce development, there's a nice 3 to 5 minute video they can go click on. Talks about the high school level as well as a success story from a business locally that's here as well. So that's in the pipeline right now. I don't have a production schedule since we just kind of discussed it this morning, but that'll be coming out, in the near future.
Would just perhaps add on to that, and as we're looking at the work plan update, we're kind of marking this item complete for 2019. I think we should all be thinking about for goals for 2020 of what is this version of our goal, or how do we build upon this for 2020, and kind of take it to the next level of continuing to provide these types of resources and connections to business leaders and employers here in Forest Lake and the region. Vadnais Heights their EDC was represented at the end of the program today, and they have a very enviable program. And so, modeling some of what they have done to build a program, also partnership, I think, with, well, certainly the schools, Washington County, but also I think the Chamber is a good opportunity here. So something I think we should all be thinking about in the next couple of weeks as we're preparing for 2020 budgets and work plans, as kind of how do we take what was started today and kind of build on that to make it even more extensive.
How many Forest Lake businesses were represented?
I didn't get a final count. There were
I can find out, but I would say probably 30 businesses there today. Also representing Hugo, Scandia, and the city of Wyoming, and Forest Lake as well.
It was good representation, and there was a good cross-segment of kind of industry as well as other kind of other business models.
Just kind of going back to the list here, the virtual spec building project, just kind of gave an update on that during the meeting. The finalized the community asset list that was completed back in the first part of the second quarter, and that actually was used quite extensively in building out of Invest Forest Lake. So that actually was completed, but also was used, and I built up the website. And then we also completed the downtown beautification project with the additional flower pots downtown. So that's kind of the work plan update. And to President Bain's comment, when I kind of look at the work plan in total, we're actually making some pretty significant headway on a lot of the items that are there. A few of them, are marked as complete and either now are at the point where we have to kind of potentially redefine them or look at other items to kind of support them. So I would suggest in the future we kind of go back through and maybe look at the existing work plan, because when I've been going through this over the last 2 quarters, all of a sudden it was a lot of check marks are on the box, a lot of work are going from on the scope to being completed now. So we're making a lot of good progress, and we'd like to kind of keep that momentum going and maybe kind of redefine the next level of work plan for the EDA in the near future.
I also piggyback onto that comment by saying I think some of the feedback we heard in the community sessions and some of the strategic planning conversations that council is going into over the next couple of weeks, I think will kind of provide this group certainly some great feedback. And as we're refining those comments, we'll bring back those EDA-related items back for this group to consider. I know for sure there's some downtown comments in there, and there's some other things we can kind of be chewing on how we might either want to amend a 2019 work plan or to extend beyond what we have today, and then certainly building into 2020. So,
Could I ask a question about the downtown beautification?
yeah.
It's like a starting point. And when I'm asked, what do I think of it just that way. It's a starting point. Does the group that's been doing that need to knock on our door in some sort of consistent manner to ask for the opportunity to improve on that, magnify that, do more with it? Are we just going to stop right here and say that's it for this year? What else can we do to get to a point where we're getting to the statement's a wonderful statement, but it'd be lovely to have twice, 3 times, something of that nature down there to really make a significant impact. So I'm just curious as to how we proceed from here forward in terms of talking about it and maybe funding it.
Well,
Yeah,
I know
please.
that Jamie met with Connie Grabovi earlier this week. I don't know how that, it was last week. And I'm not sure what was covered in that, because I wasn't able to go and it was just the 2 of them. So there's a conversation going on. I know that walking down the streets of Forest Lake over the 4th of July, I thought, these are beautiful pots, but there's a lot to be done. It's a beginning.
Yes.
So I think maybe some suggestions, some ideas from both the beautification people as well as from the EDA, from the city, like, oh my gosh, what do you think of this idea? So that they can wrap their mind around, kind of the next project or a couple of projects.
I'd
And have a plan like this.
I'd certainly like to find a way to encourage that, because my simple thinking is multiply what we've already done so that it reaches a point where it does stand out versus have to be found. And so I'd really like to see it prompted or pulled forward in a discussion.
So you're talking numbers of pots?
Yes.
And that would have been my first thought until I walked along there and I thought, there's just a lot of basic stuff that has to, so that the pots can really stand out. Like pulling weeds, killing weeds, cleaning up parking lots. It's hard to have a whole bunch of beautiful stuff really make an impact when there's not a great base or backdrop.
Unclean alleyways, for example.
Unclean alleyways, and yeah.
Well, I certainly would defer to the group's thinking on this, because I just drive down and I say I can find the pots.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be good to
And I tell you
really
what,
see
those
the
pots have been growing. They look fantastic.
At any rate, that's my thought. I'd just love to encourage it to become more. And maybe
Well,
that's
and
multiplication
I
of
think
it.
a hope of the beautification group would be that as the city steps forward, the businesses will take a half a step forward as well. But maybe they need some guidance in what that might even look like. Because not every eye sees the same things when they drive through downtown.
So as you as a member of that committee, would you be asking us to do something for you very specific? Like clean the weeds up or what have you?
I will work on that, towards that goal, yes.
I was just gonna say that you pointed out all the things that my wife pointed out to me when we were driving by there the other day. So, yeah.
And
I agree.
the happy thing is, as we walked along because one of our concerns was that people would trash the pots. And I picked out one gum wrapper myself and put it in the garbage. That was the only, no, I thought they were very well respected. So that was kind of a test as well.
Just a comment on that, I think that as far as the EDA's role at this point, maybe adding more pots, that expense, but I think long-term, to sustain them and that really, I think the city needs to budget that, just as they do the park or the baskets or whatever else.
For sure.
That's my thought on it, if the council, so.
And so I suspect one of the topics that we're kind of dancing around a little bit is around probably some code enforcement. That's been a topic of conversation at the council level as well. And, some additional work on the part of the city on some of those challenge areas and working with some of those property owners. It is hard
And
work.
would it be possible to have a workshop setting where we could kind of identify some of those things and then prioritize them and decide, okay, let's go at something doable first and then, have a prioritized list?
Yes.
Or would you like the beautification group to present a list and then have the EDA or the city council? I'm not sure what the right procedure.
I think it needs to start with a broader citywide discussion. So we have the same conversation on residential properties as we do on some of these questions we're having on downtown, and it comes down to code compliance. I think it needs to happen first at the council level, where council's having a conversation around overall code enforcement. How are we approaching these questions? And I mean, because what I suspect that session is going to do is create this laundry list of code enforcement challenges. And I wouldn't necessarily want us to be necessarily cherry picking of, well, yours is okay, but yours really
No.
isn't, right? Or,
No,
I think it's a broader.
I think I was talking more about, okay, what code should we really go after first? And might it be this or might it be that? Versus if you try to just all of a sudden start enforcing every code that has been violated,
Oh,
we
right.
would become the
Right.
Nazi police again, and, yeah,
Yes.
and we've done that.
We do not want to do that.
It's a matter of asking people to get, you know what I mean? I agree,
Correct.
talking about it.
Yes. Let's, at the council level, let's have a kind of a conversation first around what do we want to do? Because part of it also is going to be around our resource. We need to make sure that we are resourcing that model appropriately. That could be potentially quite burdensome on staff. I think one of the other goals of this beautification group, though, has been producing more carrots or more incentive for code compliance, rather than, well, the path we're gonna head down otherwise is a very kind of punitive stick model, which I'd rather,
would
like,
rather
let's
it be
say,
a positive path.
good follows good, and what can we do around positive enforcement, positive conversations? But again, the elephant in the room is there are some challenges where we probably are going to have to take a compliance model.
There's no question about it. No question about it. You gotta have that, you have to have that in your arsenal
Right.
to make it work. That's all there's
Well,
to
and
it.
as I drive through other small cities, I often, you drive through and you go, oh, this is really.
Yes.
Or, oh.
Oh, yeah.
And who, how do the really clean, nice-looking cities, how do they do that? And is that worth conversation with other mayors or?
Yes, I think it is, and I think it's also, and again, because the same topic follows, whether we're talking about downtown or whether we're talking about residential
Residential,
streets
yep,
and
absolutely.
streetscapes. Yes, and again, not to be redundant, but circling back to some of the feedback that we're getting in these community listening sessions, I think that is also going to prompt some of those questions, so. I guess I would encourage any members in this group interacting with that beautification group, and I said the same when I spoke with Connie, was to encourage them to use us as a resource. We certainly want to, be a resource and to help them with what's needed. But, any volunteer group, you want them to follow their path of what they're interested in. We're interested in, supporting their ideas, which I think was part of what precipitated the partnership with Jamie on how can Parks, Lakes, and Trails be a model. And I would say encourage us to keep that conversation going, because I think that can be one of those positive, carrots we're putting out there to create some positive change, but also recognizing that council and also ultimately the EDA is going to have to do some work on the compliance side. Make sense? I see some nodding heads. Anything else to add? Okay. Dan, got some feedback on the work plan. Do you have what you need from us on this item?
I do. I just have one last thing. Not to kind of say we're just studying everything right now, but we are kind of studying everything right now. Humphrey Institute reached out. They have a group of students as part of their master or their graduation project. They take a city and they look at a particular aspect of it and look at it from like a market economic perspective. They want to do the city, the downtown area of Forest Lake. Two-prong approach. They want to look at it from a retail and restaurant perspective to kind of say, what's the gap downtown? What type of businesses would look good down there? What type of business potentially do we need in that area? They did one of these for Ramsey, the city of Ramsey. I got a draft copy of what they did for that. It's pretty deep study, which is good. They look at the trade area, kind of look at what's existing in the city, what potentially would be a good fit. So working within the kind of identify the project, it'd be a fall through December as part of their fall build out. So the report would be delivered end of the year. They won't actually come in and present because it's just end of their semester. From the timing perspective, it's too tough, but they will submit the full report. I can be able to give the full mock-up or what the results of the study are, but looked at it from this perspective of, restaurants and retail is kind of the focus for downtown. Would work well if you're looking at a multi-family or multi-use building, what potentially you could slot in on that first floor. So I think it's going to be extremely valuable data in terms of, looking at it just from, less of again, kind of a pie in the sky. I think, this type of business would go in there. They will actually look and say, hey, you have a need for X or a need for Y. And one of the things I saw in Ramsey study, they had a need for a furniture store, which to me was kind of like a unique kind of, but when you start looking at it, it actually, the numbers that support the fact that they needed a furniture store in Ramsey. But
They needed a furniture store?
that's what one of the, and again, at first I was just kind of like, wait a minute, what? And I started looking at it, the numbers, and it's little to no cost to the city. It's minimal.
So who's doing that?
The Humphrey Institute, so they have, it's part of their, the grad students program. They'll go through and they do
Awesome.
a big data dive. They go through, it's intense.
So University of Minnesota School of Public Policy, this is their grad program.
Yep.
Are we a finalist of a candidate, or is this a for sure?
All I gotta do is
we
get the
are-
paperwork back in and I'll start
Fantastic.
working in August on it.
That's,
So-
I make a motion, you do that.
I have the paperwork on my desk. I just have to draft a couple of paragraphs, and it's a minimal involvement. I just have to go down, I think, in like one weekend or one Wednesday in August just to meet the team. And
that's great. I'd be
but-
happy to go with you.
they come out, they meet with the business owners. They're on the ground. It's, pretty involved in their end.
The
So
business owners would love that.
That's fantastic.
it's going to be a great project when it's completed.
Out of curiosity, do you know the population of Ramsey? Is it comparable to Forest Lake?
Comparable, yeah. I think the area they looked at, I thought it was like 18,000. It wasn't too far off. It was
But
kind of.
much less
but
downtownish.
they had a different, I think they were focused on, they had, memories a little fuzzy, they had like a area that they were gonna develop as kind of a downtown-ish area out of whole cloth, and the economy kind of went down and never really fully took off, so the Humphrey Institute came in and said, here's what we would probably need from that area. I've already kind of told them the downtown area is one, I already have the area defined, but I think it actually will work outside of just the downtown area. I think just, it's gonna bleed out into the kind of the city as a whole.
26,000.
Ramsey?
Could you send us the Ramsey report as just an example, teaser? That would be, it's a great resource.
That was all I have. That's my
All right.
last play of the
We
day.
are to the other section of the agenda. Does anybody have anything that we haven't already discussed?
Should just know if the Forest Lake Chamber Golf event is this Monday.
Yes. And no one has invited me to play.
Say that one more time.
No one has invited me to play.
And Judy's still looking for a golf date. Put that out there publicly, if anyone's missing a member of their foursome.
I need to get back to some people on an update of, was there any discussion of a welcome to Forest Lake sign anywhere, in anything, or?
From a monument signage perspective, we
Yeah.
have not, I mean, that has, we've not made any progress, or that has not
Okay,
gone anywhere since our last
Can we get it into the
discussion.
budget for the coming year somehow, and get some quotes? How do we go about making a move on that?
We have a bunch of, don't we have a bunch of packages from the past on monument signs and the entrance points? This was fairly studied a couple, maybe 4 years ago. I don't remember.
Be saved in your files as like gateway signs too.
Can you recirculate that? Let's perhaps pose it back to this group on, from a cost perspective.
Yeah, if I recall, they were not.
They are
They
expensive.
were extremely expensive at the time.
25 to 35,000 was the cost, I believe, for the proposed sign at the time. And then reference the White Bear Lake one that you hit on the north end of town, that was about 50.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we don't need anything that elaborate.
But you guys went to it as far as to do a bunch of mock-up with fabricators, so you could see what's already been done
Okay,
and scale back
I'll
from
take a
that.
look.
scale down. We just want to welcome people to Forest Lake, tell
You
them where
looked
they are.
at 97, probably a good thing we didn't pursue that one, if you see what's already going on. You looked at south end of 61 northbound, looked at the north 61 coming in. You looked at 97 coming in right by Forest Hills Farms.
It'd be good to recirculate that. I think that was pre my time on the E EDA.
It may take me a while to dig it up. I know it's out there somewhere, I just don't know it off my fingertips.
And then let's include that in some budget discussion, as we're kind of pulling together budgets here for, certainly for the EDA in the next month or so. Anything else for the other section today?
I have something.
Absolutely.
I was involved with the Lake Association pretty intimately early on when it was in its inception, and I had someone reach out to me wanting to know about the marina. Apparently, I believe they're full of slips as far as slips. Some of you may not know, but the marina was an EDA project that we pushed forward, and I'm just wondering if there's been any conversation with the boat club people or already interest in doing that. I think to expand that would be good as far as giving other opportunities. If we do have condos or something, apartments more downtown, having that option for people to have their boat, there would be, I think, a plus for marketing the downtown area as far as residential. So I don't know if boat club that they've reached out to you about asking any for an expansion at all, or is anyone?
But I know.
I think we've had a formal request for an expansion. I know that there's some history when we talk about this further, we can talk about kind of permitting and what it takes from a DNR-based permitting based on size. Ryan,
My memory of the project was they built it to the degree they would not trigger any environmental review and documentation of that next step of the DNR. So that's where they landed, and if they go any further or bigger than that, then they would have to start going through the EAWs and stuff like that.
and not to say we couldn't, we certainly, we could entertain that, but certainly that comes with a
And when
different
we had
cost
that
structure.
conversation, they were just starting up, and so their capital was already
Right.
going into what you see today, so maybe they have some capital, they could do that. Because we did survey the lake and all that, and had water depths in a grid, to get them approved for what they did
Right.
have now, so.
But something we should certainly have on radar as we're doing planning here for 2020. Anything else? I don't have anything other than what we've already talked about. And so unless anyone has anything else to mention, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
And will we adjourn?
I'll second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Oppose? And we're adjourned.